Welcome to the Learn It, Use It podcast, presented by the graduate programs in the Operations Management and Engineering Management in the College of Engineering at the University of Arkansas. In our programs, we stand by Learn It Today, Use It Tomorrow. The instructors for our courses are professionals with real-world experience where you will be able to immediately apply what you have learned. Today's workforce is changing rapidly and all fields require adapting to new environments, which means you, yes you, will need new credentials quickly to improve your current performance. Our graduate programs and certificates apply to all industries, so you will be competitive in today's workforce. If this appeals to you, listen to today's topic about cybersecurity and how it is not just for IT professionals anymore. Instructors Roshone Tate and Dr. Rich Ham discuss how with each click we are all accountable for keeping our information safe. Okay, well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started, and I want to welcome everyone to our first kind of pilot podcast for the Operations Management Engineering Management program. Thanks for being with us, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Today, we've got cybersecurity, not just for IT professionals anymore. We've got Dr. Rich Ham with us here today in studio, and joining us virtually is Roshone Tate. So Dr. Richard Ham is the Associate Director of the Master of Science in Operations Management at the University of Arkansas. Dr. Ham retired from the United States Air Force and the Department of Homeland Security, where he held various regional and national leadership roles. He is a recognized subject matter expert in Homeland Security, consulting domestically and internationally for the United States government. Dr. Ham teaches courses in leadership, cybersecurity, global competition, Homeland Security, resilient design, and unmanned aircraft systems, otherwise known as drones. Dr. Ham designed and led UAS courses for research and industrial applications, teaching platform and sensor selection criteria, as well as compliance requirements. Ms. Roshone J. Tate is an experienced information technology and cyberspace operations executive with 31 years experience in network operations, information protection, IT services, information assurance, security, compliance, and enforcement. Ms. Tate retired from the United States Air Force after a distinguished career serving as a Mission Support Group Commander, Cyberspace Operations Deputy Group Commander. It's quite a mouthful. Executive Officer and Commander of the Communications Squadrons. She served in various assignments, and her career is highlighted by implementing the Air Force's first rapidly deployable satellite communication system for deployed security forces, installing Air Education Training Command's first dual commissioned operational runway mobile microwave landing systems, showcasing the Department of Defense's Ceremonial Bugle Initiative, and developing an unmanned aerial vehicle data dissemination redundant Predator received terminal communications capability. Ms. Tate currently serves as an instructor for the Industrial Engineering, Management Systems, and Operations Management Department at the University of Arkansas. So everyone, welcome. We'll go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Ham and Ms. Tate for today's topic in cybersecurity, not just for IT professionals anymore.
Thanks, Karin. First off, you may have noticed, some of you have been with us before, that we have a new format that's kind of a combination webinar and a podcast, and so you'll be seeing that more and more in the things that we put out, and we'll eventually actually have a site you can just go. I don't know if it'll be on Spotify or not, but something like that. We might be old, but we're trying to be hip, so we're doing our best. So first off, I'm very happy to have Roshone here today. And you could hear from her bio some of the things that she has accomplished, some of which have direct national security implications, but also the principles that all of us can use in industry. Right now, besides just the damage it would do to your brand, what happens when you lose proprietary information, and in some cases, information like PII, that is kind of the hotbed now that we're seeing legislation that's even as we speak, some of it that will probably come out in this Congress that is specifically about the protection of information. So, Roshone, thank you for taking the time to do this. I want to ask a few questions of you, and kind of I'll talk to everybody a little bit about I think what all of us have experienced. First off, um, I'm not the first slide. I am not a cyber trained, other than what I was given in the Air Force and the Department of Homeland Security. I didn't start out life as a cyber person, and really, I just always left that to the IT people. Kind of date myself some that when I started out in the Air Force, uh, I was an air traffic controller, and we were in the comm squadron. That's how long ago that was.
Yep.
And we spent a lot of time. The data centers were right next to us, and we had these principles to protect information, all the way back, and that tracks all the way back to information security, uh, which were posters in World War II: loose lips sink ships. And so that really is what this grows out of. But we're showing what here's what I was really um, somewhat surprised later as I became more senior. Even though I had those IT people working for me, every time that there was a security breach or something occurred, for some reason, I was always the one left holding the bag, asking, why did my person do this? So we talk about responsibility and accountability. Can you speak to that some, and what has changed about who's responsible for cybersecurity now?
Yes, I can. And thank you for letting me come today. This is going to be a pretty good event. Um, Things like you said, back in the Air Force, organizations today, everyone always said the responsibility of IT security is the IT department. Uh, but today it's changed because cybersecurity has changed so much with technology growth. Every user that touches a computer has the responsibility to protect the network. It starts the moment you turn on your computer, the keystroking, and you go to your email, you're out surfing, everything you click, that provides an unfortunate vulnerability to a network. So your IT professionals no longer, they're responsible, but the responsibility lies with everybody. And the reason why when you had someone get in trouble from an IT incident, is because according to the NIST, the senior manager is ultimately responsible for securing the network. That's why they always came to you when it came for accountability. It used to be, if it's a vulnerability, no one understood information technology to begin with when it first started, and then it only belonged to us geeks. I'll call myself a geek. And then as it evolved into cyberspace, no one understood cyberspace. And then it just escalated really quick. You're talking the past 10 years, it just went from a word to, oh my goodness, it's an actual space of ones and zeros that traverse across the world at a rapid speed. So as people begin to start to recognize it, they really did not really embrace cybersecurity nor cyberspace, and just left it into the IT realm. It really took the IT department to figure out how to get to the table.
So go ahead. I don't want to interrupt you, but you brought.
No, you're fine. So if you kind of think about it, if you go back to when you were in the Air Force, you never had an IT representative at the table, right? That IT representative was always on, I call it the peanut gallery, because nobody understood. But it was imperative that the IT personnel and community, we had to stop speaking the tech geek. That's the problem. We didn't know how to speak in layman terms to our customers. That's why our customers never appreciated our business. But as we began to grow and evolve, we recognize that our customers are important, but we have to make sure our customers understand the importance of information technology and cyberspace, which is why eventually you saw the IT person make its way to the table, because now senior leadership is like, wait a minute, my cyber person is very important to me and my organization to be successful, because if I'm not, my stakeholders will no longer trust me because their data is being vulnerable to attack.
So that is so true. And when you say you brought up the NIST standard, which I think that's an important thing. I think most operations managers, especially middle to senior managers, don't understand. So we hear So, one of my jobs at Homeland, I had a room full of, we used to refer to them affectionately as mushrooms because they were in a dark room and they always liked to light down and sit in there. And they were, so they're computer engineer. I had computer engineers, software engineers, and we had a huge system. They work for me. Every time they come in, they tell me, we're not in compliance with a lot of government things, but then they talk about the NIST standard and ISO. And I want to, I need some money to get a Fair Institute certification for these three folks. And we've got these third party people trying to get onto our system, the airlines and others. And so we need to do a certification of their system and or a validation that they have. And so very quickly, I had to uh, get schooled on what all those things meant and try to have someone interpret so I could read it and see. And you're right, most of them pointed right back to me. It was always pointing back to me that I had responsibility. So for those of us that aren't, trained in that vein, talk a little bit how can I be? What are the kind of things I should look for the IT people that I depend upon that they're following a standard that I can be reasonable, and how do you even decide a good standard?
So, Rich, the first thing I would do is meet with my CIO and IT department leads and find out, okay, what are the standards that our company are using? Which NIST standards, what frameworks, which ones are we following? And then the next question I ask is, hey, can I see the latest test inspection report you had? Because your inspection report will tell you if the organization's network is secure or not secure, because you want to make sure everything that you're doing is going to go through the system with no problem. And then the other part, which is what I spent the majority of my career doing, is so I'll give you a good example. I worked for a general officer as an exec, and I was moving on to another job. And he pulled me aside and he said this to me. He says, as you continue your career, make sure you understand your customer. He said, your career field does not understand its customers, which makes it hard for us to embrace you. So I kind of took that to heart. And I was a young captain when that happened. And I took that and brought that throughout my whole entire career. Even today, I still apply that same methodology. And I taught my team the same way as IT professionals, we have to go to the customer. We have to be able to communicate in a common language that we can all understand so we can make sure the network is good. So I actually went to each of my customers and asked them, tell me about your mission. What does it do? How is it important? What are the pros and cons about it? Tell me how I can better serve you, because really IT really supports everything. We're critical, but we support all mission sets in every organization. So it's important for us to learn our customers' missions as well as teaching our customers the importance of cybersecurity. Because you have to come that balance. And I came up with a little formula, which is, in order to balance it out, you got to have security. That's always number one. You got to meet your business needs, and then you got to apply what's the acceptable risk. And that's where that senior manager like you back in those days, you had to come up with that. What risk am I willing to accept on my network to meet my business needs at the expense of security? Those are some three key components that every manager, mid to senior level to C-suites, all should be asking those three questions, because it's imperative to the success of your organization, and it will help eventually keep you from having cyber attacks by coordinating with your IT department.
I did exactly that thing. I met with the CIO and went through and asked them to come and scrub us off a little bit a couple of times with three or four different that I had, and they did. I felt better about it afterwards. But accepting risk, that's a really important part to bring out, I think. You can go to the next. And that kind of segues right in. We're talking about balancing and measuring that risk. So, I remember very clearly. This was when I was in Homeland, but we had a serious security breach. with national security implications. And so the reaction was that we had this IT lockdown to the point that we couldn't do the job.
Wow.
And I remember at the time, a high-ranking official came in and he said, "Well, the terrorists have now won because we're completely shut down. We can't do anything." So, we were in the blind in some cases. We'd shut ourselves off because, the partners we were using, some of the international partners, we had cut them off. So we weren't getting information from them. So talk a little bit about that, how you balance that risk with the ability to actually do the job.
Perfect. It's you got to be very careful when you do that, because one, you have to ask your question: what information am I willing that I want people to see? What information I don't want them to see? How do I lock it down to the point I can still be functional in the organization, but also keep internal people who don't have a need to know from accessing that data? And then, what are your business needs, your mission objectives? How is my organization going to disseminate that data to my customers? And that's internal and external. And then you ask yourself as a manager, what risk am I willing to accept by letting user X look at this particular data? Um, it's almost as though when you do a software patch, if you will, you got a security update, and I'm gonna update my computer right here, which is critical to my mission. But if I don't test it before I do that, then I'm making a risk. Meaning, if I push that software patch and my system goes down, I just messed up my entire production. Right? So how do I get my production now? I've messed up my production. I messed up my timeline. Now I'm not going to meet my customer expectations on the latter end. So you have to get with your IT development and your department and say, hey, this is my mission set. This is where I'm willing to accept risk in this area, but I cannot accept risk in this area. And that's where you and that department sit down and go, okay, so he or she or they will come together and say, okay, team, we can accept risk at this level for this particular mission set for that department. However, these particular mission sets cannot accept any risk because these are high. So it's really talking back and forth with those department heads and having regular occurring meetings, which they're beginning to happen now. But sometimes what you find is when the CIO has those meetings with the departments typically send their subordinate, which is not good. That department head should be their equivalent to the CIO so they can understand the importance of that, how they're going to get that security, hit their mission, and what risk, because ultimately the department head is responsible for that risk. And if that subordinate says, yeah, I'm willing to do that, which is not in line with the senior has to explain to the CEO, if you will, what happened. Or if you ever have an inspection, they'll have to explain to the NIST, all the different frameworks, why they had a vulnerability in the network, and now their stakeholders' data is susceptible to being taken.
Yeah, and I think several folks trying to understand that is really been difficult. I see the trend when you see the transition, because when it happens, Target had a very substantial breach here about 7 or 8 Christmases ago,
Mhm.
and nobody was talking to the IT person. It was the CEO. People didn't trust their ability to basically to protect their credit card information, and so
Right.
consequently, it went all the way to the top. So, all right. Well, I mean, we kind of moved to the next one. So, and I'm going to kind of mix this with 2 things. So, in the cyber course in the program that you teach, but also when in the crisis and resilient design course, it's interesting. We follow kind of these principles, and I've found it fascinating because I did start much earlier in a kind of a physical security role and crisis management, and we kind of have these they might be named a little bit differently, but always what we have are these principles we follow, which is, detour, detect, deny, respond, and recover.
Right.
Now, different people have, a little bit different model, but those five things are generally what it is. And our ability to respond and recover sometimes is the mitigation,
Yes.
the tools that IT folks give us. All of that comes out of um, the policies, procedures, and people that we ask to do. So, can you talk a little bit about, first off, what kind of minimum policies and procedures we need? And then people, I mean, now you have to have some insight into psychology for phishing attempts, those sorts of things, because what are the things that make people click where they typically wouldn't click? So, what are those policy, procedures, and people principles that you think are the most important
Yeah.
to keep us out of trouble?
Okay. Well, one thing about policy, you should keep in mind that in cyber, it's so dynamic that policies lag behind every change in cyber. That's the bad part. By the time an event happens, you got to go change that policy. So you're kind of being kind of reactive. I wish we could be proactive in some sort, but that policy is always going to fall behind whatever that active event happened. Then we're going to come up with a new policy. I call it the flu. We're always taking last year's virus for the flu for this year. So it's really mitigating the virus capability from there. So that's the same thing with computers. Your policy is following that last attack, making adjustments, and then you're moving on to the next one. So it's a constantly moving, evolving process. But the policy, the number one big thing is cybersecurity training. We all take it all the time. I know we get annoyed sometimes when we have to take it once a year. Some companies, the company I work for, they ask you to go twice a year. So you have to do that cybersecurity. I know it seems like repetitive, but we wouldn't have to do it if we still didn't have users out there who are still clicking on things that they shouldn't click on, downloading files that they shouldn't download on, inserting devices that should not go onto the network. Those things are still vulnerabilities, but it's still re-educating and re-educating those people. So first, definitely educating. Second is critical is you got to have a cyber response plan. In case of a cyber attack, you need to have a plan in place to mitigate that attack, what steps you need to do to resolve, and then you got to go back and have an afterwash, if you will. What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we prevent X, Y, and Z in the future? And then who did we miss in this step? And you bring those teams back together. But you're always dusting off your cybersecurity response plan all the time. The other part is email restrictions. Some companies have it where you can't even, USA is a good example. They have an internal email system and then they have an external email system. And those two do not cross paths. So that's a good way of how they're keeping their cyber network really locked down really tight by installing those particular protocols. The other is how to handle sensitive data. We need to always remind people about PII. People's information is very important that we have to protect. And our customers are entrusting us, like Target, entrusting in us that we are protecting their data. That is the one cybersecurity that I would say we as a world are failing at, is we have a hard time of protecting people's data. We have to get better at that, but that is our biggest vulnerability because we have not figured out how to stop that. The other part is proper storage and handling of your IT devices. The other is software updates. I cannot express. So I know a lot of people say, well, it says update now and you delay it. Well, every time you delay, you're allowing that vulnerability that the software company has found to maneuver inside your device. And as it's maneuvering, it's finding its way to your company's network, which now you have a vulnerability. And if the network goes down, guess what? You cannot do your business processes anymore. So software updates are very, very important. The other part is, I love this. When the Air Force, when we were in there, they were starting to introduce information of things. I do not like IoT. I did not like bring your own device because from a cyber perspective, that is more vulnerabilities that I had to watch for on the network. Yes, it was easy for the customer, but from a network protection standpoint, it introduced a lot of vulnerabilities that were just not good. The other piece is if you bring your own device and you hook up to the network, a lot of customers did want, when we had a vulnerability, did not want to give up that device because it was theirs. But that's the agreement you make. If you use your device on the company's network, if there is a vulnerability, we will take that device and you cannot get it back because it has a virus. So IoT, if you notice in the pandemic, that was a big thing because with the pandemic, a lot of companies said everybody home for the health and safety. But at the same time, we overwhelmed the networks. So your IT professionals were working round the clock. One, making the bandwidth bigger to accommodate everybody teleworking back home. Your IT professionals in the organization, and even at the University of Arkansas, we were trying to figure out, okay, expand the bandwidth. How do we accommodate the IoT people logging in? And how do we ensure that the people at home logging into our network are doing what they're supposed to do, which is a simple task of software updates, data integrity, protecting all that information at home, all those things or all those processes and procedures and policies that in the last 2 years we had to quickly change to accommodate an actual real world event. Where we prepare for that? Not really, because I guarantee you a lot of companies did not have a risk management framework product that they could dust off for an epidemic. So it was all new. So when the pandemic happened, no one had that risk management framework ready to go for that plan for what would happen for the what if scenario. A lot of people were focused on the supply chain, like what would happen in a pandemic for the supply chain. But everybody forgot you have to send everybody home to prevent spread. How do they get to work teleworking? So where was that cybersecurity framework plan?
Yeah. So it's these things, of course, in crisis, and that's a lot of what cybersecurity management is. It's responding to crisis and mitigating things, right? But we have these unintended consequences. I'd like to get your take on the people piece, and I'll tell a short story. And so this was when early on in Homeland, and one of the things in my portfolio was to do testing, which included cyber testing in the physical realm. We had some IT people that did it, but we would try to break into systems, air carrier systems, systems that belong to the railroads and others to defeat the no-fly list and those sorts of things. But the carriers, this is before it really became completely in vogue to have SSO to get on the systems. And so I was sitting in my office one day and realized that I had 27 sign-in credentials for 27 different, and this was just when password keeper kind of things were coming out. And so, trying to remember all of those and the credentials. And so I go into my deputy's office and he's got all of them here.
Yep.
So on our next test on secure systems, we put out a protocol and told all the agents to, when they went into the systems, look under and found hundreds of violations because the unintended consequences of something ridiculous, trying to memorize 27 credentials or that sort of thing,
right,
led to this. And that it expedited the transition to SSO for a lot of these things, and when the CAT cards came over. But my point is, sometimes we make these decisions and it affects people. Give us your perspective about that a little bit, just, because sometimes we don't force them to. They make a choice, but we give them no choice almost.
and you're exactly right. And I would say that is probably the biggest failures in the community is we make decisions without consideration of the customer. But in some instances, sometimes security of the network will trump that because you got to look at that risk. I'm going to take that risk depending on what the severity of that cyber attack is and the vulnerability, what it's going to represent, to go, okay, I'm sorry, Rich, I know you don't want that, but I'm going to have to lock you down that hard because that vulnerability is more than you can know. Because not sometimes cyber personnel won't tell you, which they should to a certain extent, depending on the classification. Um, Sometimes you don't know. You want to ask that why, like why, and sometimes they can't give the why. So you have to kind of like salute smartly back in the day, salute smartly, and just go ahead and march on. However, there are many times though we do implement policy change, procedures that affect people's everyday work life. And that's not fair. And then we have to, go backwards once we did the damage and figure out what did we did wrong. Um, People are important. I mean, to me, what I found is before I implemented a change, I took the time to explain to the customer, this is what's going to happen. This is why we have to do this. And if I couldn't tell you the why, I told you I couldn't tell you why because of a certain type of security. But if I found if you explain to the customer what's going on and why it's going on, they're more susceptible to understanding to the change and take the change a lot better. It's when you enforce the change and don't explain it is where you get the heartbreak. And that's where you lose your customer trust. So to me, gaining customer trust was very important in my field because I need the customer and my job is to support the customer and make their job better than what it is yesterday. So you're right. People are important when it comes to, cyber attacks. People, I saw a quote and I have it on my thing. I can't find who the author is, but that author says it perfectly. Phishing is the art of manipulating people. And it really is. You think about, I think I gave my students the example of, the grandmas and the grandpas out there who are not too familiar and savvy with, computers, and they're at tracking what all the cyber threats are out there. They're just communicating with their grandkids and everybody and their friends, and then they get an email. So here in Arizona, we had an elderly lady lose her entire savings, about $300,000, to someone who claimed to be a retired general officer who was in need of money and needed her help. And they had been communicating for a while. And eventually he managed to get all her money away from her. Now the flag that would have went up for you and I, which was he specifically told her to get certain books of certain size, cut them out and put cash money inside and mail them to a certain, particular location. Now that's a flag for us, right? Because we're familiar with cybersecurity. But the grandmother and grandfathers out there, that was not a flag. Their heart is just being compelled to this person who needs help. And that's the art of manipulating someone, people. And so here you have this nice lady who had a nice retirement that she's been waiting on, and then now she's going to be homeless. But it's that people piece. People are very important, and we got to remember that people are not things. They're not ones and zeros. They have a human. We can never forget the human element to everything we do because it has an impact, and it can be detrimental to our business. And then that's where we in the IT business we can lose your faith in us. It took us so long to get to the table, but we can easily be put back in that back row if we lose your trust and we lose your confidence in our ability to keep you secure and to stop wreaking havoc on your normal everyday lives of doing business techniques.
It really is about people. Ultimately, all of it comes down to that. Well, we'll move on to the next in this emerging technology. So I always have to use how far things have come in my lifetime. So I remember the first testing uh, when I was young. In the Air Force, the comm squadron had a truck because all the computers was just so sloppy in their in signature, and literally the first computer. I remember we got the first computers. They would just pull up in the comm van and they would recreate what you were typing on your computer. And
Wow.
so the solution to that it kind of became the precursor later to secure rooms. They just put us in a Faraday cage. Basically, they just built this big metal Faraday cage, and that it would prevent some of that. But if I look at the emerging technology, Talk a little bit about what you see of these things that are emerging and how difficult it is. You talked a little bit about it. Hey, our policy can't even stay ahead of it. It's like we're having to react to it. So we focus a lot of times on responding and recovering, detecting it, isolating, responding and recovering. But what's the technology you see that's emerging that scares you, I guess I'd say, with your background, that you really has you worried that we have to pay attention to?
So this goes all the way back when I was in undergrad school, when I was taking computer science classes at Park University. I took my first artificial intelligence course. And as I was going through the course, right about a third through there, we were reading on how AI was, and I was fascinated at first, but then another part of me started to become worried. So AI terrifies me. It's great, it's an awesome tool, but if it's not carefully controlled and understood, it could turn into something else. Now I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is not Skynet from the Terminator," but keep in mind, in the Terminator, that particular robot was AI intelligence, and the programming code that was embedded in that system it was a learning mechanism. It was learning how to react to certain behaviors, in particular human behavior. So if the coder, which is the human behind that, is not careful with coding that code to right, that system can become self-aware. You look at it now, AI, I think you and I discussed this. AI is about what, 30 years? So think about it. I went to undergrad in the 90s. Here we are, fast forward. I want to date myself. Fast forward, and now 30 years, we're 30 years away from it to being full blown. We already had one company, I think it was Tesla, they already built their first iRobot. And I was like, holy cow, they came up with a robot. You already have the pneumatic arms that a lot of operations fields are using to take care of automobile industry, your logistics chain. So AI is everywhere. AI is in your house as we speak. I'm quite sure many of you guys have Alexa, or you have that iRobot that's going around, the Roomba that's going around cleaning your house and everything. You have the refrigerators that are now telling you, hey, you're out of milk, you're out of eggs. All those things are AI. What comes with that is a cybersecurity vulnerability. Because as all those things are hitting your home network, and I'll use your home network. So you got Alexa, the refrigerator, the thermostat, your water softener, your washing machine, your dryer, all those things are hitting your home network. If you fail to password protect any of those items, that cyber person has now found a way into your home network and can wreak havoc inside your house. They can mess with your thermostat, turn it up and down. They can turn your refrigerator on and off when you want it. They can make your little Roomba run around the house. So all those things are self-learning. So if you ever wonder sometimes when you're out shopping or you go someplace and you get an email, go, hey, I noticed you were looking for Nike shoes. Okay, artificial intelligence. Those department stores are learning your shopping habits. And when you go to the grocery store, you notice and you get your grocery receipt and it gives you a coupon for something that you typically buy often. So even grocery stores, and they've been doing this for the past, I want to say 10 years, grocery stores really started doing this. Every time you swipe and use your little, I call it, I like the card. Yeah, you save money, but you're also giving that grocery store information about you. So it's learning your buying habits. So it knows what to send you to bring you back to the store so you can buy. So right now, AI is everywhere. You can't avoid it because everything is learning something about you and your habits. So think about that. Machines learning your habits. And if you were a cyber criminal and you wanted to attack someone, all you have to do is break into their network or their device, and you can know everything you want about that person. Now take it to a business. You have artificial intelligence in that business. You break in, you can learn everything about that business, everything that they do, and you can take that stuff, you can sell it to the black market, or you can go and manipulate it and cause havoc and attack the whole thing, which kind of goes into your ransomware type of thing, right? They learn about the habits. I'll use the example Baltimore. Baltimore had a ransomware attack, wanted $17 million to give them back the keys to the city, if you will. Well, what was interesting is 6 months prior to that, Atlanta had the same attack. So you would think that the cities around the United States would have said, hey, Atlanta, how did you go about that last ransomware attack? What did you do to basically you have to pay? There's no way around it with ransomware. But what mitigation efforts are you putting in place to forget it, to prevent it in the future? Can we learn from you? And what risk management plan you're going to have? Guarantee you that didn't happen. Same thing with Baltimore. I guarantee you that didn't happen. So everyone is being reactive. No one is taking that time to put a risk management plan together, to think about the what if scenario. I call it the what if. Every manager should be asking themselves every day in their team, what if this? How are we going to mitigate it? What if that? What are the second, third order effects? What if AI gets in our system and we don't code it right and it takes over our robots? How do we mitigate that again? Sometimes it's not simply unplugging the plug, because a lot of those things have what? Battery backups, or they're solar powered. So the what if scenario, what scares me? Artificial intelligence. We got to maintain it. We got to control it. If we don't, it's just going to wow, it's going to wreak havoc.
It's interesting when you bring up, because I'll note from some of the last studies that I've looked at, the ransomware attacks. Everybody thinks it's like hackers that got into a system. Most of those happen from an employee clicking on a link that they shouldn't. Almost
Yes.
all of them do. So, I mean, that in itself tells us why it's important, for us to make sure that folks are paying attention and appropriately trained. I'll talk just for a moment. You go to the next one, and I'll. Drones. This is so, because that's kind of my thing. Now these case studies of drones being used to hack Wi-Fi. They're being used to spy in high-rise buildings on presentations. I can just go on and on of the intersection of that. And then there's a really good example of first responder agency that were using drones to do some surveillance, basically, and they didn't realize that somebody else had hacked them. They were using their own drones against them by being able to see where security guards were stationed and others. So in that world in manufacturing, how do we make decisions? We talked about industry standards some earlier, but how do we make a decision on new technology, what the risk is? Because nobody really, I can tell you, the question was asked, can we do this with drone technology as an example, but no one ever said, should we? So, so can you talk some about when technology comes in and we all want to jump in there because we want to make sure that we're, on the cutting edge, but where we should make, wait a minute, maybe it's not always good to be the first entrance into a building. Maybe, maybe we shouldn't always be the first adopter. So how do you make those kind of decisions?
Those are kind of tough sometimes, because depending on where you at, so I've been in several times. I've been in that position in the Air Force where my boss wants to bring something on. The security behind it was just too risky, but it was what the boss wanted, right? But you got to somehow figure out how to get the yes. Don't say no. Get the yes somehow. Show the risk, but that's where I actually like being the person in the room saying, should we do that? And if we do that, what happens to X, Y, and Z? Can we fix it? Can we reverse back? So having that person in your room is, I call it the person, not the naysayer, but the person who makes you think inside and outside that box. Because you're right. We jump on a lot of new technologies, but we never ask the question, should we do that? Is it ethical? Because you got to think about ethicals, because ethics is important, especially in AI. And I would recommend to everyone out there, as you're watching and following AI, watch these companies and make sure, are they being ethical with their new technology products? Because that's the big case in that in the community is people are not being ethically, if I get it right, sorry, are not using ethics when it comes to AI. They're crossing those boundaries, or they're teetering on the right and the wrong of it. And you want to stay on the right side and be ethical when it comes to AI. But a lot of the technology, like you said, drones first came out. I remember back when they came out about around 2000s is when they first started doing UAVs. And I remember a lot of the pilots were not happy about the drones. They're like, hey, the UAVs are not going to replace the fighter pilot. They're not going to replace their, but they were never designed to replace the fighter pilot or the plane. They were designed as a support mechanism to them. So as we begin to produce drones, making them bigger, smaller, different capabilities, the question, like you ask, is when you start to weaponize them, and the drone in that example you have in the case study, they technically weaponized that drone if you think about it. They added extra battery. They gave it excess amount of memory. I think it was like 16 gig of memory was on that little thing. So, and then there was two, because one was actually broke, but it was hidden on another building. So you're right. Do we do that? Should we weaponize the drone? I won't speak on what's going on in the world right now, but that actually happened. One part of our world where a drone was actually weaponized. Was it the right thing to do? That's where your ethics come in, your morals of the company. Where do you stand as a leader and your company manager when it comes to these nice, high profile technologies? I know they're great, they look awesome, but is it the right thing to do? And that's a question you have to ask all the time. I can't give you a for sure answer to that, because it really is going to boil down to the individual, and the company. It's the company, how ethical they're going to be, and ask that question, and are they going to do the right thing? Some yes, some no.
So that one, and this, we put the slide up about it specifically, but just like you said, this was the interesting part there was, and I'll ask uh, I'd like to ask your take on this too. This attack was a persistent attack, and it was during a transition. So they had a third party, and a third party was allowed to get there. So they had a security issue associated with the third party anyway. But they were making a transition that had to do with security credentials and some other things. And during that transition was when the drone, there was it was attacking, like hackers do on the internet externally. But and then the transition, and they weren't paying attention to some of the security credentials, and then boom, it got in. And once it was in, it's just like it was like being on the internet. I mean, it transmitted what it wanted to in there, and had basically malicious code that was embedded, and it took them a long time to find it. So, but talk a little bit about I've already kept you a lot longer than I planned to, but I'll just say about transition and the kind of things that you have to do. New systems is a perfect time. You're transitioning from one system to another one. Safeguards to do in that time, and what do you do to kind of overcome that threat?
So in that scenario, what it sounds like to me, so remember the three I call together. You got security, business needs, and risk management. Sounds like to me when they were doing that transition, someone took a risk that they left a particular vulnerability open while they transitioned. They were willing to do that risk because somebody computated that it was a low risk, but it was actually a high risk. And they didn't account for the what if scenario. What if during this transition time, that one gap that we have open that somebody can maneuver in? They didn't account for that. That's that three piece that someone just made that that unfortunate risk. So now the CTO, the CIO, and the senior manager have to answer to why they allowed that risk to come in. So I'm quite sure they did the math and they did the assessment, but that drone figured out its way. That they have to be a little. It's hard because your cyber attackers are so smart, and I really wish all of them would use their geniuses for the good. But then I would be living in a perfect world, right? We don't live in a perfect world. So you have your enemies, your non-enemies. But these people, the key thing behind it is cyber attackers are patient and they can wait. And when they see that opportunity, that's when they go for it. Patience is the key when it comes to that. However, it's the opposite effect when you're protecting your network. You're not as patient. It's protect, 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 protect. And then when you do that too fast, or you don't take that time to look at the security, your business needs, your risk assessment, and you miss that one step, then that's when you have the attack comes in. So that's what kind of, I think, what happened to that company. They probably sat down, they had a meeting, they went through all the risk mitigation factors, they went through the checklist, and there was one part in there that they said, yep, I'm willing to accept the risk here while we transition, but no one deep dived into how important that one vulnerability right there was that allowed that penetration to the network. So it's an ongoing battle. You hope sometimes you get the right risk, but then that's where you bring in your, kind of like you said, you had your red team and your black team. So they kind of should have had that red and black team in their room to kind of go, okay, I'm thinking from the attacker viewpoint. This is what I see, because the offense is not going to see what the defense has, and vice versa. So you got to have those alternate players in there so they can see where their vulnerabilities are. If you just got all offensive players and they're just doing all your attack everything, you'll never see what the defense is thinking about. That's why you got to have both sides of those fields going at that one time. I lost my train of thought on this one. I'm getting old.
Well, even if you did, the point's well taken. I think that transition period in accepting risk and the idea we sometimes get lulled into only looking at what's presented as the really good, effective quantitative tools to measure risk. But most of the time in these cases, they all start with a subject matter expert qualitative assessment of the risk, and then the numbers follow. And so when that happens, if what went in qualitatively was bad, then the quantitative output doesn't work very well. So
Absolutely correct.
okay, I think we are, and actually, so as we wrap up, Rochelle, thank you very much for a great perspective. I think it's helpful for all of us to understand that. We've got more at the university. We have, the Master of Science, obviously, in Operations Management and Master of Science in Engineering Management, but we also have certificates and micro certificates to help you on your way in whatever analytical skill. I think what we have here is you literally have a QR code that you can scan off of your screen if you like, and you can pull that down and it'll show you all of our certificates, micro certificates, and our degree programs and how you can stack those in career progression. And I'll just go on to say that in the program, one of the things that we enjoy, and it's all often is touted as one of our strengths, is to have experts like Rochelle, someone that has not just academic experience or credentials, which she does, but this real world experience that she can pass on. And so that kind of information is, one of the things that we really pride ourselves on. So Rochelle, thank you for sharing your expertise tonight. And I'd encourage anybody that's interested, if you look, you can take her course. She teaches the cyber course and is doing a fantastic job providing that information and real world experience.
We also right now we want to invite anybody. Do you have any questions for Dr. Ham or Rochelle with everything they've talked about? And we'll go ahead and Dr. Ham, why don't you tell us about our next podcast coming up here shortly?
While we're waiting for if anybody has a question, the next podcast will be about entrepreneurship with the operations managers. It'll be someone I know a little bit, Garrett Han, but a story, I think, of understanding how if you want to be an entrepreneur, which in particular in this day and age, we have a lot of people that are headed that way, you'll suddenly find out that, wait a minute, you mean I have to understand all this finance stuff? I have to know about hiring people, and I have to understand cybersecurity, about how are things. And so you could look at the 10 OM decisions and go right down the line and figure out that if you are interested in that or considering or just would like to know more, how it works with an entrepreneur as they try to do basically all these functions on their own when it's a startup and then grow it into a larger business. So that'll be November 15th next month. Mark it on your calendar and please sign up. And I think you'll enjoy it.
So Ed, thank you for joining us. Ed Amos is online with us today. He is an alum of the MSOM program. He's also on the board of our alumni society. I've worked with Ed this past year, and getting to know him has been great. But he said, I recently heard about an issue regarding drones and a Chinese manufacturer potentially using information captured by individual drones for their own use.
So we definitely would be out of time, Ed, but I'll give you, and I actually have an entire lecture on this subject, and it's so important that the most recent there's a bill to use UAS to do critical infrastructure inspections, and it prohibits the use of any drone that's made in China. And that's because specifically of a discovery some years ago where packets of information were being spun up. So without getting too technical, what it comes down to is that information can be used against the United States if you amass that. You can even navigate without GPS, which, you know, in a wartime scenario is a big deal because if you're in GPS denied environment, it's a high security threat. So the entire issue about cybersecurity with drones and this discovery has now led to legislation. In fact, those particular drones were put on the no-buy list for DoD, and very soon will be on the Department of Homeland Security and DOJ site, and they're already on DOI site. If we do research with a drone right now and go to Department of Interior land, and they allow us to go, we have to sign. We will not use any products that are not American made and that have any chips that come from China. So big change. It's been brewing for a while, but the law is changing specifically to address it. So good question.
Great. Thank you so much, Ed. Again, everyone, thank you for joining us. Look for some information coming out of the pipe for the next podcast coming in just a few weeks. So thank you again, Dr. Ham. Thank you, Ms. Tate, and we'll see everyone later.
Thank you again.
Thank you.